My story is the one about journalism in the Balkans, but it's at the same time a story about how fighters for freedom of speech can turn out to be also oppressors of that very same freedom of speech. It begins with how I got first into journalism. The exposure to the power and vulnerability of journalism for me was first experienced while I was living under a repressive regime. In Milosevic's Yugoslavia, journalism was a government-run affair. It was synonymous with propaganda. Basically, information was used to bend according to the desires of the political regime. So no wonder I was a frustrated 19-year-old when I first got into journalism through a job working as a translator for the BBC crews that had come to cover the war in Kosovo in '98 and '99. I thought I was unlucky. Here were the Western European media bringing us hopeful photos of the fall of the Berlin Wall, while I was stuck in the other end in Eastern Europe, where the media was being used to stigmatize people according to their ethnic and religious background. Media was basically aiding the killing because it was dehumanizing the enemy enough that it made it easy to kill. While Kosovars had for a decade resisted this regime peacefully, suddenly a group of people started appearing after a decade that rebelled through an armed resistance. We proudly called them freedom fighters. They did not bend, they stood up for their rights. And in my romantic idea, the Kosovo Liberation Army really were the fighters for freedom of speech. So, covering this war was worth it. It was worth risking my life. It was worth getting occasionally arrested by the Serbian media while covering the war. It was worth having a house burned down and becoming a refugee. It was all worth it because we won the war. Our revolution worked, and with this, we thought we had earned our right to speak our mind. What happened next was that these freedom fighters transformed into politicians and disarmed peacefully. A fascinating story of transformation to have witnessed as a local journalist. Things will only start getting boring from now on in peacetime, I thought. Little did I know. In post-war Kosovo, our job as journalists was to make disarmed war leaders accountable to their public. Piece of cake, I thought, piece of cake compared to war zone coverage. I set up a media NGO called Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. I was one of the co-founders and set up a watchdog current affairs program that employed Western-style journalism, and its main point was to challenge inept governance. We called it simply Life in Kosovo. Now, considering the saying goes, all democracy is local, in a democracy all politics is local, we were the first media team to go to every single town in Kosovo and hold election debates with the audience of that town, where we put the future mayor to make his promises publicly, and then a year later we came back, played that tape to him, and hold them accountable for what he had promised. This is when things started getting to trouble. Some of these now mayors were former freedom fighters. We challenged them all, regardless of their war credentials. And some hardliners, this didn't sit well with them. They started using their intimidation tactics to physically threaten myself and my team, to the point that eventually there was a 12-day campaign in a local government tabloid which labeled my team and I traitors and Serbian spies. Life in Kosovo, said the tabloid, had shortened my life, and the editors asked for my lynching. Now, this is not a story of a victim. I'm telling you this story in order to share the 3 lessons I learned from this. First lesson, reporting in peacetime can be just as challenging as reporting in wartime. My 10-year post-war coverage of Kosovo war has been something I was completely unprepared for, despite the fact that I was taken to highly sophisticated courses by the BBC. They were called hostile environment courses. But I wouldn't exchange my experience of covering the war and the adrenaline for anything, but I wish I would have saved a little bit of that for what followed since. I had to learn how is to become a journalist in peacetime, where the main challenge was to cover how freedom fighters turned into corrupt elites and were willing to do anything to defend their illicit business interests. So we got representative democracy, all right, but 12 years on, we know that what we got is a little bit more than that. We got a corrupt representative democracy. In our line of work, we may be measured by whether we can run a marathon rather than a sprint. So save the energy of the revolution for what may follow. Second lesson, freedom of speech is not cheap, literally. Clearly, there's going to be financial retaliation if you are to challenge corrupt elites. My main job as an independent journalist, I thought, is not fundraising, but to monitor and challenge ruling class. But to do so independently, you need to build a strategy of financial independence. Now, this I wasn't unprepared for, because as a woman coming from a patriarchal society, I know that even if I have to challenge my own father, I need to have my own money, let alone if I want to challenge an entire corrupt elite. So all I did in the first 2 years after the war is fundraise for my program. And many people didn't believe it will stay on air, so it took me a while, after which I fundraised for an entire crew of 3 people. This was first, and I only got my show on air because it was free for the TV channel, and they made sure they put it at 23:15 at night when no one's watching. And after a couple of shows, they said, no one will come anyway, after they see what I did to the panelists in the show. Nevertheless, I stood my grounds for 1 year at late night schedule, and after a year, the ratings were so good that it became the second most watched program after the evening news, which was traditional. And the main point was for me not to base the entire strategy on the personality of one journalist. I wanted Jeta Xharra, life in Kosovo, to become an institution of watchdog journalism. And now we have 70 people, not 1 hour, but 3 hours of programming, an independent English newspaper, the only one in Kosovo, and an online portal in Albanian. This financial independence basically allows us to professionally report on issues of day-to-day governance, the efficiency of courts, and unraveling of illicit business interests within the political class. Now, the third lesson, final lesson, which you may all know, international community can be a vital ally. This may be clear, but I was becoming very cynical of international community's involvement in Kosovo because I come from a tiny little country where it is overly internationally administered. Nevertheless, when I was threatened, a local head prosecutor admitted that he was too afraid and intimidated to take up the case of threats against me and my team because he was afraid of the consequences. It was international organizations that basically I had to rely on, as they turned this into an international embarrassment for the Prime Minister, who in the end had to be resorted to ask the tabloid to stop the campaign against me. Eventually, it took an international prosecutor to initiate this case in court, and I'm now looking forward to justice being served there. Final thought. Our struggle as journalists is a never-ending battle to ensure freedom of speech, something we Kosovars thought we had a guaranteed and earned our right when we won the war.